Welcome to IQriously. Get comfortable. Take a slow breath. Tonight, we are going on a journey. Not a short one. The road we are going to travel stretches over 6,400 kilometers from east to west. It crosses the highest mountain passes in the world. It cuts through deserts so vast and so harsh that whole caravans vanished into them and were never seen again. It passes through cities that were, for a time, the wealthiest and most cosmopolitan places on Earth, and are now ruins in the sand. The Silk Road, the greatest trade route in human history. Not a road exactly, not even a single road, but a network of routes that connected China to Rome and carried between them not just silk and spices and gold, but ideas, religions, technologies, diseases, and the entire complicated cultural bow, inheritance of half the world. Tonight, we are going to walk it together. There is nothing you need to do, nowhere you need to be. Just listen. Before we begin the journey, a word about the name. The Silk Road was not called the Silk Road by the people who used it. For most of its long history, it had no particular name. It was simply the way east, or the way west. The name Silk Road was invented in 1877 by a German geographer named Ferdinand von Richthofen. He used it to describe the ancient trade routes between China and the Mediterranean, focusing on the most famous of the goods they carried. And silk was, for a long time, the most valuable. But historians now prefer the term silk routes, plural, because there was never just one road. There were northern routes and southern routes, land routes and sea routes, mountain passes and desert tracks, all of them part of the same vast network, all of them carrying in both directions the goods and ideas and people that connected the ancient world. The name has stuck though, and it captures something true about the route's most glamorous cargo. Let's begin at the eastern end, in the ancient city of Chang'an. Chang'an is now called Xi'an, in central China. It is a city of considerable size even today. But in the Han dynasty from around 200 BC to 200 AD, it was the capital of one of the world's great empires, home to perhaps 1 million people. A city of wide boulevards and walled markets, of government offices and temples, of workshops where artisans produced the goods that would travel west across the world. Chief among those goods was silk. The Chinese had been producing silk for thousands of years. The process begins with the silkworm, the larva of a moth called Bomix mori. The silkworm feeds on mulberry leaves. When it is ready to pupate, it spins a cocoon from a single continuous thread of silk. One cocoon contains a thread up to 900 meters long. The thread is incredibly fine, about 1/10 the diameter of a human hair. But it is extraordinarily strong. Weight for weight, silk thread is stronger than steel. To make silk fabric, the cocoons are placed in hot water to loosen the sericing, the protein that holds the thread together, and the thread is carefully unwound from multiple cocoons and twisted together into a single yarn. The yarn is then woven into fabric on a loom. The resulting fabric is light, lustrous, strong, and extraordinarily beautiful. It drapes perfectly. It takes dye in vibrant colors. It keeps you cool in summer and warm in winter. In the ancient world, there was nothing else quite like it. And for centuries, only the Chinese knew how to make it. The secret of silk production was one of the most carefully guarded industrial secrets in history. The Chinese understood that their monopoly on silk was enormously valuable. Exporting the knowledge of how to make it would destroy that value instantly. There were laws at various times making it a capital offense to export silkworms or mulberry seeds. The secret held for an extraordinarily long time. According to tradition, silk production was discovered around 2700 BC by the Empress Lizu, who was drinking tea in her garden when a silkworm cocoon fell into her cup and began to unravel. Whether or not this story is literally true, silk had been produced in China for at least 4,000 years before the Silk Road trade routes were formally established. The first evidence of silk in China dates to approximately 3500 BC. Silk threads have been found in Egyptian tombs dating to around 1000 BC, suggesting trade connections were operating long before the fall or opening of the Silk Road. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder complained in the 1st century AD that silk was draining the Roman Empire's gold reserves. Romans could not get enough of it. Roman women in particular wore silk garments that, by Roman standards, were considered scandalously transparent. The Roman Senate passed laws at various points attempting to ban silk on moral grounds. They were ignored. Silk was simply too beautiful and too much of a status symbol to give up. The formal opening of the Silk Road is traditionally dated to 130 BC, when the Han Emperor Wu sent an imperial envoy named Zhang Qian on a mission to Central Asia. Zhang Qian's mission was not commercial. It was diplomatic. The Han Empire was under pressure from the Xiongnu nomadic warriors from the steppes to the north. Emperor Wu wanted to find allies in Central Asia who might help deal with the Xiongnu threat. Zhang Qian was sent west to negotiate. He was captured by the Xiongnu almost immediately and held for 10 years. He escaped, continued his mission, and eventually returned to Chang'an after 13 years away with 2 things: disappointing news on the alliance front, and an extraordinary report on the lands and peoples to the west. He described kingdoms and cities that Chinese officials had never heard of. He brought back new plants, grapes, alfalfa, sesame. He described horses of remarkable quality in the region of Fergana horses that the Chinese called heavenly horses and desperately wanted for their cavalry. His reports sparked an enormous interest in the Western lands, and trade followed. Let us now imagine ourselves as a merchant in the 2nd century AD, setting out from Chang'an with a caravan heading west. We are not wealthy enough to organize our own caravan. We have joined a larger one, 20 or 30 camels, a dozen merchants, guards hired to protect us from bandits, guides who know the route. We carry silk, mostly, bolts of it, tightly wrapped in oiled cloth against the dust. We also carry porcelain, the extraordinarily fine ceramic that only Chinese kilns can produce. Tea, pressed into dense bricks for easy transport. Some spices. Some bronze mirrors. We head northwest from Chang'an, following the route along the southern edge of the Gobi Desert. The Gobi is not entirely sand. It is mostly gravel and rock, with dunes in certain areas. But it is vast, dry, and unforgiving. The Taklamakan Desert to the west is worse. Its name, in the local language, means something like, "You go in, you don't come out." The Taklamakan is one of the largest and driest deserts in the world. The routes around it, northern and southern, are threading along the edge, from oasis to oasis. The oasis towns are the lifeline of the Silk Road. Small cities, really. Each one a few days' travel from the next. Each one with water, food, stabling for animals, inns for merchants, the caravanserai, large walled enclosures where caravans could shelter, rest, trade, and swap information about the road ahead. The oasis towns are also where you meet the world. In the markets of these trading posts along the Silk Road, you encounter merchants and goods from every direction. Chinese silk going west, Roman glassware coming east, Persian metalwork, Indian cotton and spices. Central Asian horses, and people. Sogdian merchants from the region of modern Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, who are the great middlemen of the Silk Road. The Sogdians are possibly the most important people in Silk Road history that most people have never heard of. They were not a great military empire. They did not conquer anyone. What they did was trade. They established trading colonies along the entire length of the Silk Road from China to the Mediterranean. They learned languages the way other people learned crafts. They were the translators, the brokers, the bankers of the ancient world's greatest trade network. We have letters written by Sogdian merchants in the 4th century AD, found preserved in a watchtower in the Gobi Desert. One of them, from a merchant named Narrated to his business partner, is a complaint about the state of trade and the political situation. It describes disasters in China, including what may be a reference to the sacking of Qi. Cities by the Xiongnu. It is one of the oldest merchant letters in existence, and it sounds, in its anxieties and frustrations, remarkably modern. Things are difficult. The roads are uncertain. Business is hard. Sound familiar? Continuing westward from the oases of the Taklamakan's edge, the road rises. Dramatically, the Pamir Mountains stand between Central Asia and the easier lands to the west. The Pamirs are among the highest mountain ranges on Earth, passes that the Silk Road used regularly crossed at altitudes of over 4,000 meters. At those altitudes, the air is thin. Horses and camels struggle. Humans struggle. The cold, even in summer, can be lethal at altitude. The passes were snowbound for months each year. Caravans waited at the eastern approaches through the winter, or risked the crossing, and sometimes did not survive it. Ancient sources describe the high passes with something between wonder and terror. The sky above was extraordinarily blue, the intense blue of altitude. The glaciers were blinding white. The wind cut like a blade, and on the other side the land fell away towards the green and relatively temperate valleys of Bactria, the region of modern Afghanistan. Bactria was one of the great crossroads of the ancient world. It had been part of the Persian Empire, then conquered by Alexander the Great, then ruled by Greek kings descended from Alexander's officers, then absorbed into various Central Asian empires. The city of Balkh, ancient Bactria's capital, was, at various times, one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. Greek and Indian and Persian and Chinese influences mingling in its markets, its temples and its art. From Bactria, the routes split. Some went south into India, where the spice trade and the cotton trade drew merchants seeking different riches. Some went west through Persia, the great empire that controlled the middle of the ancient world for much of the Silk Road's history. The Persians were not passive middlemen. They taxed the trade heavily. They sometimes blocked it, and they benefited enormously from their position at the crossroads. The Parthian Empire, which controlled Persia for much of the era when Rome and China were the great powers at either end of the Silk Road, was deeply aware of its value as an intermediary. When Chinese envoys tried to establish direct diplomatic contact with Rome, the Parthians sometimes quietly interfered. They had every interest in maintaining their position as the essential middle link. The Romans, for their part, were frustrated by their inability to deal directly with China. They knew, roughly, that soap came from somewhere in the Far East. They called it Serica, the land of silk. They were not entirely sure where it was, and the Parthians were in no hurry to tell them. The farther west the road goes, the more it splinters, into routes heading north through the Caucasus to the Black Sea ports, into routes heading south through Mesopotamia to the Persian Gulf, where goods could be loaded onto ships, into routes through Syria and the Levant to the Mediterranean ports. The western terminus of the overland Silk Road was, roughly, the eastern Mediterranean, From there, goods were loaded onto ships and carried to Rome, to Alexandria, to every corner of the Mediterranean world. The city of Palmyra in modern Syria was one of the great Silk Road cities of the Western routes, an extraordinary oasis in the Syrian desert, a city of marble colonnades and monumental temples, of wealthy merchants and sophisticated culture. The caravans from Mesopotamia arrived at Palmyra carrying the goods of China and India and Persia. The caravans from the Mediterranean arrived carrying Roman goods heading east. For a remarkable period in the 3rd century AD, Palmyra became briefly independent, and its warrior queen Zenobia built a short-lived empire across much of the eastern Mediterranean. It ended in Roman conquest and Zenobia's defeat. But the city's ruins standing in the Syrian desert today are among the most beautiful in the world, a monument to the wealth that the Silk Road generated. What was coming from west to east, along with the gold that paid for Chinese silk. More than most people realize. Roman glassware, the extraordinarily thin, elegant glass that Roman craftsmen could produce, was highly prized in China and has been found in Chinese tombs. The Chinese could not initially replicate the technique. Roman glass was a luxury import. Wool textiles went east. The Mediterranean world produced wool of excellent quality and with sophisticated dyeing techniques. Horses, as we mentioned, went east, the Central Asian and Persian horses that the Chinese wanted for their cavalry. Gold and silver went east, the precious metals that paid the Roman trade deficit. And knowledge went in both directions. Buddhism traveled from India into Central Asia and China along the Silk Road routes. The monks who carried it used the same roads as the merchants. The same oasis towns that hosted trading caravans also hosted Buddhist monasteries. The cave temples of Dunhuang carved into the cliffs at the edge of the Taklamakan, where the Silk Road routes converged, contained thousands of Buddhist paintings and sculptures from across 1,000 years of pilgrimage. Trade. They were sealed in a cave around 1000 AD, perhaps to protect them from an approaching invasion. They were rediscovered in 1900, and they contain texts and artworks that show the extraordinary cultural mixing that the Silk Road produced Chinese, Indian, Persian, and Central Asian styles blending into something entirely new. Christianity also traveled the Silk Road. Not the Western Christianity that we might expect the Roman Catholicism of medieval Europe, but the Eastern Christian tradition known as Nestorian Christianity. The Nestorians, following a theological dispute in the 5th century AD, were expelled from the Byzantine Empire and spread eastward. Their missionaries followed the Silk Road all the way to China. In 635 AD, a Nestorian monk named Alopan arrived at Chang'an and was received by the Tang Emperor. He was given permission to preach. A Nestorian monastery was built in the capital. A stone stele carved in both Chinese and Syriac was erected in 781 AD, describing the arrival of Nestorian Christianity in China. It still exists. It is one of the most remarkable surviving documents of the Silk Road's cultural legacy. Islam, born in Arabia in the 7th century AD, spread rapidly along the Silk Road routes. Within 100 years of the Prophet Muhammad's death, Muslim merchants and missionaries had reached Central Asia, India, and were pressing towards China. The cities of the Silk Road became, in time, among the most important centers of Islamic scholarship and culture. Samarkand, Bukhara, Merv cities that had been Zoroastrian, Buddhist, Christian, and pagan at different times, became great Islamic cities. Their learning and their wealth were the product of centuries of Silk Road trade. There is one thing the Silk Road carried that nobody wanted: disease. The same routes that carried silk and spices and ideas also carried pathogens. People from different disease environments, meeting in the oasis towns and the trading cities, exchanged not just goods, but immunity profiles. The Antonine Plague that devastated the Roman Empire in the 2nd century AD, possibly smallpox, is believed to have arrived along the eastern trade routes. The plague of Justinian in the 6th century AD, which killed millions across the Mediterranean world, is now known from DNA analysis to have been bubonic plague Yersinia pestis. And the most devastating of all, the Black Death, the pandemic that killed between a third and half of Europe's population in the mid-14th century, now believed to have originated in Central Asia and to have travelled along the Silk Road carried by rats on the caravans, or by the fleas that infested them. From Central Asia, it reached the Black Sea ports. From there, aboard Genoese trading ships, it arrived in Sicily in 1347. The rest is history. The most catastrophic epidemic in European history was a consequence, at least partly, of the same connectivity that had made the Silk Road so valuable. Trade and disease have always travelled the same roads. They still do. The Silk Road's decline was gradual and had multiple causes. The rise of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century actually revived the land routes for a time. The Mongols controlled an enormous swath of territory from China to Persia, and under their rule the roads were relatively safe and the trade was encouraged. Marco Polo made his famous journey to China during this Mongol period. His account of the wealth and sophistication of the Mongol court and of China itself was received in Europe with a mixture of wonder and skepticism. Some people thought he was making it up. The cities he described seemed too large, too wealthy, too sophisticated to be real. They were not. After the Mongol Empire fragmented, the land routes became more dangerous again. And then, in 1453 AD, the Ottoman Empire conquered Constantinople and closed the traditional overland routes to the east. European merchants who had grown accustomed to Asian goods were suddenly cut off. They needed new routes. And so began the Age of Discovery. The Portuguese sailed around Africa to find a sea route to India. Columbus sailed west, looking for a different route to Asia, and found something entirely unexpected. The Silk Road's closure, in a very real sense, drove the European exploration that would reshape the world. The desire for the spices and silks and luxuries of the East, frustrated by the Ottoman barrier, pushed European sailors out into unknown oceans and led to the encounters and the catastrophes of the colonial age. The Silk Road officially closed in 1453, but its legacy never did. The cities it created still exist. Samarkand and Bukhara in Uzbekistan, Kashgar in western China, Almira in Syria, Xi'an, ancient Chang'an, still standing at the eastern end of the road. The religions it spread: Buddhism in East Asia, Islam in Central Asia, Christianity in unexpected corners, are still practiced by hundreds of millions of people. The crops it moved: grapes, cotton, citrus fruits, sugar, paper, gunpowder, have permanently altered what human beings eat, wear, write on, and fight with. And the fundamental insight it embodied that human beings, given the opportunity, will travel enormous distances, face extraordinary hardships, and cross the world's most forbidding landscapes in order to connect with each other and trade, remains as true as it ever was. Somewhere on the Silk Road, in the 2nd century AD, a merchant is sitting in a caravanserai in an oasis town. He has been traveling for 3 months. He has crossed a desert and is about to cross a mountain range. He is tired. His feet hurt. He is a long way from home. He is eating bread and drinking tea and listening to the sounds of the caravanserai around him. Other languages, other music, smells of other foods, the calls of animals he has never seen before. He is, in the middle of nowhere, at the center of the world. The whole human world moving through this point. East to west, west to east. An endless exchange of things and ideas and germs and stories. The road goes on forever, in both directions. And tomorrow, he will get back on it. Thank you for spending this time with IQriously. Rest well.